So, welcome back to Third Age Reforged and to another battle replay, and as I said, this is going to be more of a field battle today to sort of break up all of the really long sieges that I've been doing lately. It's always good to have a bit of variety after all, and this is also an RP battle between the forces of the Misty Mountains, who are outnumbered by an army actually today, against the forces of Cardland, and this should be fairly interesting actually, because both of these factions are not exactly well known for having the most steadfast morale, and they are very reliant on units to buff the morale of their main line to make sure that they don't have mass routs happen to them. So it'll be interesting to see, because this could be a battle that could very much be decided upon morale if either side is a little bit too careless with how they use these units. But yeah, it's going to be fairly interesting, I think. But we'll go for the faction that has more armies fielded today, so I imagine they're going to be taking on the role of the attackers, or at least, you know, they're certainly the ones that are invading in the RP sense. And the player Steel Units was the one who sent me this battle replay, so big thank you to him. He is going to be playing on the Cardland side today, and he's got a couple of units here of the Gwathlo Trackers, which they are an interesting kind of unit because, you know, they have the hiding ability that Rangers have, but they do not have the body piercing. So, you know, certainly they're nowhere near as good as Rangers, but the fact that they can hide, of course, does mean that they can be fairly, you know, in a straight-up skirmish fight, obviously they're going to be pretty poor against other archers because they really don't have much armour at all. They're wearing those furs and sort of those leathers, which are not really going to protect them too much. But, you know, the fact that they can hide means that they can avoid being in a skirmish fight entirely, so they can be quite a tricky unit to deal with if Cardland insists upon using them. But, you know, certainly there are easier units for Cardland to use in terms of their archers, which are good for a skirmish fight. But here against the Misty Mountains don't have a huge array of archers. Their skirmish options come elsewhere. We'll see how well they can do. One piece of equipment here, the ballista, is actually going to be very useful for Cardland here, because I would imagine the Misty Mountains were hoping that they could maybe sit back, use the hill to their advantage here in what can only, I assume, be the foothills of the Misty Mountains. I know that this map is called the Gap of Khan, but certainly Cardland and the Misty Mountains are nowhere near that part of the world, so we'll just assume that we are near the Misty Mountains themselves, and Cardland are sort of making an offensive action. But yeah, the ballista should be interesting here because it will allow them to obviously pelt the Misty Mountains from afar and perhaps force them to come forwards, and then Cardland can surround and maybe destroy the goblins, whether that be through morale shocks or just through sheer strength of arms, because with 3 armies to the goblins too, this is one situation in which the Misty Mountains won't be able to rely on having a numbers advantage to crush their enemies underfoot with. We have several units of Greenway Garrison Spearmen as well, I think. Well, I'll say several, just the 2. Obviously in melee they're really not very good at all. They have a very low attack stat, and obviously the Spear Malice on top of that doesn't help. But they are cheap. They're actually pretty good at absorbing arrow fire as well, with a decent shield value. For the most part they're just going to be here for numbers and to really sort of help pad out the Cardland infantry force, give them a bit more in terms of numbers. Speaking of which, we do have some Greenway Garrison footmen. Pikemen is certainly one aspect of warfare that Cardland are very comfortable with indeed, and the Greenway Garrison footmen make up the bulk of that because they are the cheap pikes. You can have 3 before the cost increases. Unlike most factions, you can only bring 2 of such a pike unit. Yeah, it's going to be very interesting to see how they're used, because obviously if they can get into position, they can very much hold the masses of goblins at bay. But as we saw just a moment ago, there are trolls involved, and trolls will absolutely smash units like Greenway Garrison footmen into the dirt. Cardland, of course, one thing that they are very well known for is their very powerful crossbows, and the Minotaur Romen Gatekeepers are the strongest that they can field. Obviously very, very good in melee with those halberds as well, but the main attraction, of course, is the crossbows themselves. Lots of stopping power. They don't have the armour upgrade here, but Cardland, the Misty Mountains can bring crossbows as well, but this is an aspect of warfare that Cardland is most certainly more prepared for. Back here we have a couple of very elite infantry units, including the Tharbad Warhammers, and they will be very, very good for dealing with trolls and the more heavily armoured forces in the Misty Mountains roster. Very, very strong units of AP shock infantry of the bodyguard tier, and as if that wasn't enough, they also have the Dunedain captains, and I believe this is the armour upgrade for them now, with the sort of the Cardland tabards over themselves as well, with the metal arm guards as well. And they should be very good at dealing with the lower tier of goblin units, very easily able to carve their way through the lower end goblin units very, very easily with impunity, and honestly the higher tier ones as well, but I feel as though the armour piercing on the Tharbad Warhammers would be very useful against stuff like Goblin King's Bodyguard and Mounted Uruk Host. Minhiriath Sharpshooters, so it's really unsurprising once again. There will come a day when a Cardland player does not bring the full complement of crossbows, but today is not that day because crossbows are so effective. You can tell my disdain for the crossbows, I think, just from that. Dunedain commanders, we have over here obviously a very good unit of fast-moving lancers, in addition to some mercenary cavalry, which of course is melee cavalry. They will still be butchered by wargs, but they will at least put up a little bit more of a fight provided they're supported, because they are fairly likely to rout on contact with a unit like wargs. The second army, which we'll go through a little bit faster unless we come across different units, we have the Greenway Garrison archers, which this is a unit which is going to be good in a skirmish fight because they're so cheap and so numerous. They can trade quite efficiently for a long time, but low tier archers in 0.97, it's worth saying, will get massacred by really good archers. You can no longer just bog the enemy skirmishers down in your low tier trash indefinitely. So do bear that in mind. While they can be good for sort of absorbing arrow fire and skirmishing with the enemy, that does have a limit. If you're going up against stuff like Karandros marksmen or elven heavy archers, they're going to get absolutely wrecked. Over here we have some more Grathlo trackers, we have some more crossbows. Completely unsurprisingly we're seeing yet more crossbows. Greenway Garrison footmen, back in there we have some more spears as well. Back here we also have the Hearthguard of Amon Sul, which is a fairly common unit to see as Cardland just because they have a very wide morale buffing effect, so it can make them a very good morale battery, in addition to of course being very difficult to skirmish with because of their heavy armour and massive shields, and of course being spears in melee means they're not exactly the easiest target to get with a cav charge either. Over here, the Cardland variant of the Dunedain Rangers as well, so some body piercing, potentially devastating against big blobs of goblins, more Tharvad Warhammers, more Dunedain commanders, and then another new unit, a new unit model for 0.97, which we've seen before, of course, the Royal Court of House Thorondor, very much in the Arnorian style, only with a slightly brass-coloured effect to their armour. Very, very good multiple HP lancers, of course, very heavily armoured, but they do need to be careful because all of the wargs, certainly the warg contingent as well as the trolls for the Misty Mounds and the crossbows, can make using Cardland's more lance-focused cavalry quite a difficult endeavour. And then the final Cardland army, played by Mizria Accord. Hang on a minute. Mizria Accordi. I don't know. I'm butchering that, I know. But we have yet more crossbows on the front line, so the Misty Mountains going to be. It's going to be difficult to deal with all these crossbows, to be brutally honest. Wardens of Tir Gorthad, morale buffing capabilities on the front line, very, very useful, of course, in conjunction with the rest of the Cardland phalanx. Some mercenary guildsmen, which are now worth bringing over standard line infantry because they are now macemen, which means they are AP, of course. But morale is still a problem, but morale is a problem for all of Cardland, really, so if you don't keep them near your morale buffing units, that's your own fault. Some standard Dunedain captains without the armour upgrade this time. Greenway Garrison spearmen, some Minhiriath men-at-arms as well, so some basic men-at-arms rather than just the split between militia and high-tier units like the rest of the armies have gone for. Hearthguard of Amon Sul, some more Tharvad Warhammers and some more mercenary guildsmen, so for the most part, in addition to some mercenary crossbowmen way out there on the flank, for the most part these Cardland armies have invested more in their elites and then they're padding the rest of their army out with militia and then hoping that their elites and their crossbows can do the business for them. We'll see if that turns out to be true. So we have Tundra's Fox, who is going to be playing as the first of the Misty Mountains armies. He's got some heavy goblin spears on the front line in addition to the mighty Blackback Mountain Berserkers who'll be able to rip and tear their way through the Cardland militia with impunity, really. The Troll Drummers, which of course will keep these goblins fighting for as long as possible. Several units of Snaga skirmishers for those javelins, which actually Cardland don't have any javelins, but the crossbows should be more than enough to make up for that. Black Uruks of the mountains to give them a little bit more skill. Lots of trolls, as I said before, snow trolls, cave trolls, several units of them, and then lots of wargs and bolgs champions as well. And then the second Misty Mountains army is played by Pretzels, and he has got several units of heavy goblin spears also. The AP going to be useful against some of the Cardland units, but not necessarily the militia. Some Blackback Mountain Berserkers. He's also punted for some Mountain Uruk Host, which are very good line infantry actually. They're very good for what they cost as well. In fact, they might be a little bit too good for what they cost, to be honest with you. But still, it's very useful for the Misty Mountains to have a unit like this, because obviously the heavy goblin infantry is very much a garbage tier unit in many ways. Snow trolls, cave troll drummers, and then a very similar look to this side of the army as well, to be honest with you, only with Mountain Uruk Host instead of Black Uruks, Warg Riders, and then Bolgs champions. So, without further ado, let's begin. I can see having to make use of the slow motion capabilities in this battle, because I imagine everything is going to be happening all at once in a battle that is sub 10,000 frames, because even on a field battle like this, that implies a big rush, and this is where actually the deployment here of Agalar and Messier Corday is going to come into question here, because they have got Steel unit rather isolated in the Misty Mountains. I think is going to try and rush them down. You can see immediately, seeing the error of his ways, Aguilar is going to try and move over to support them. The question remains about whether they're actually going to be able to get to Steel Unit's army in time, and the Ballista is here, so it does make a good deal of sense to try and rush him down as the Ballista begins to open fire on the ranks of the Misty Mountains, and they're going right for the Trolls, missing the Trolls actually. That's unbelievable in many ways, but they do hit some Blackback Mountain Berserkers to make up for that, really threading the needle between those wide loads. Meanwhile, the Greenway Garrison archers starting to open up, and this is a problem with the way Tundra's Fox has moved his wargs. He's moved them right in front of the Cardland armies, which of course means they're going to open up with those arrows, and immediately seeing, again, the error of his ways, he's going to try and get them out of range. Fortunately, they are militia archers, so they don't have the best range, but they are going to need to still get them out of there quickly. He can't afford to just let them sit here, that much is certain, and he certainly can't afford to let them get close to the Minhiriath sharpshooters and the other crossbows. Speaking of which, now that they're here, the Misty Mountains need to charge forward with everything quickly to try and wipe out Steel Unit, because otherwise those crossbows will be able to pick and choose their targets, and the more elite units that the Misty Mountains lose, the rougher it's going to be for them. The Snow Trolls are here. In come the Bolgs Champions as well, charging right into the Gwathlo trackers. Yeah, and it's time, I think, we go down to half speed already, because everything is happening all at once. Here, though, we can see the Cardland Cavalry coming in from the side and getting a very nice charge indeed off onto the Mountain Orc Berserkers. The Goblin Infantry is here, trying to act as a secondary meat shield. But yeah, this is where the Wargs really should have been out on this flank as well, because you really need to guard yourself against the Cardland Lancers, because Lancers are one thing that Cardland do very, very well. Their cavalry overall is somewhat lacking compared to some of the other Western Kingdoms of Men, especially from their brethren just across the border in Arthedain, but you know, their Lancers are deadly, and if you give them the opportunity to charge into you, they're going to do a ton of damage very quickly. Speaking of a ton of damage though, this Cardland Phalanx made up entirely of Greenway units is going to perform very poorly against a big mass of Trolls. The Snow Trolls and the Cave Trolls. Cave Trolls in particular are not really that great in sustained melee, but they're still going to do very nicely against Militia. But fortunately for Steel Unit, he does have his Dunedain Captains ready to be sent in, which will do significantly better against the Trolls. Here are the Minhiriath Sharpshooters, and this is the problem, I think. They need to commit everything to dealing with Steel Unit quickly. Now that they've committed to this strategy, they need to follow through with it, because the longer they delay, the more likely it is the other two Cardinal armies. I mean, this one here is already set up, really, Aguilar on this slightly higher ground, and Messier Corday's army is also going to come around from the back and start wrapping up their line if they don't hurry along with things. The Dunedain Captains are being sent off the line to try and deal with this unit of Cave Trolls now. They need to get their Trolls into the Minhiriath Sharpshooters, otherwise their infantry is going to start to take a lot of damage. To be fair though, the crossbows are going after the Trolls at the moment, which is actually a preferable situation, I think, for the Misty Mountains. The Wargs, meanwhile, have very easily dealt with Steel Unit's cavalry, the Mercenary cavalry, getting overwhelmed by Wargs. The Dunedain commanders should be able to outpace most of these Wargs, but of course the Wargs are then free to very much start charging into the side of Cardland's army, and that's exactly what they should be doing, because they're in full view of the Minotaur Romain Guardians, who are going to be able to just shower the Bolgs Champions with bolts. And that's not good. They can't afford to lose a unit of Bolgs Champions cheaply just because of lost micro. The Misty Mountains are already facing an uphill struggle here, and they need to take what victories they can. These Cave Trolls are doing what they can against the Dunedain Captains, but over the long haul in a battle like this, I would back the Dunedain Captains to win that fight. And you can see there the high ground really working for the Cardland armies. The Royal Court of House Thorondor are also loitering with intent. The Cave Trolls are trying to chase off the cavalry, but yeah, again, I feel like they're not doing a good enough job here, the Misty Mountains, in really smashing Steel Unit's infantry to bits, and they're not doing a good enough job at getting into the crossbows. That's the real danger here, and they need to stop them from firing them. Meanwhile, the Heavy Goblin Spears are on the front line, getting into shield wall formation. Their armor piercing is honestly not going to be all that useful against the militia units, but the militia units are so poor in terms of stats, the Heavy Goblin Spears should still be okay with this. Meanwhile, these Snow Trolls getting a little bit stretched out, also having to deal with the Tharbad Warhammers marching through their space. Meanwhile, Tundra's Fox is doing his best, but again, I feel like he stopped over here for a little bit too long. He needed to sort of commit something somewhere a little bit faster than he did. To be fair, with Cardland's advantages that they have in this match, they should be going on to win this fight. But I would be interested to see if the Misty Mountains can make use of their Trolls and their Wargs, because if they can still win this. If they can shut down the crossbows, like they're currently doing in certain places now, they can still win this fight, but it's going to be tough. Meanwhile, these Cave Trolls over here They did get charged, I think, by the Royal Court of House Durandal, but now in sustained melee. They are going to get another charge from the Dunedain commanders, however, which is going to be fairly rough on them, I think. Actually, no, it wasn't the best of charges. A lot of it connected with the Royal Court. One of them does fall, but you'd expect the whole unit to be smashed by a unit of lancers there. The cave trolls, at the very least, they're distracting this cavalry, but here comes the wargs into the backfield now, going after the ballista. The mercenary cavalry has come back from routing, but if it charges into wargs, they're just going to... That's just going to happen again. Tundra's Fox is going to try and rear charge here onto the front line as he continues to move down the hill. But now, of course, that's the green light for Cardland to counter-attack themselves with their other units of infantry. Tundra's Fox has left a rear guard of all of these heavy goblin spears, as well as the Snaga skirmishers here, who are, of course, going to be able to utilise their javelins. The wargs here, they did charge into the back here of the Tharbad Warhammers and the Dunedain captains of Steel unit. Oh, that's going to be brutal on the goblin infantry. A unit of heavy cavalry in the Royal Court of House Durandal are going to be able to carve their way through the goblin infantry there. You can see the numbers just tumble. Brutal indeed. The javelins still doing their work. The Steel unit's army is still holding on, to be honest. I mean, he will... I feel like he is going to die eventually, but some of these units... That's an interesting death. Some of these units have been lagging behind a little bit too much. Like, one of the things you have to do when you do this is attack all at once and collapse in on the enemy and deal with them quickly. Steel unit is ultimately going to die here, but I feel as though he has managed to hold on long enough to allow his allies to set up a good position on this hill with the archers, with the crossbows. And I feel like with this firing position, especially coming around here now, Messier Corday, most of his army is going to be flanking around, and only a single unit of Black Uruks of the Mountains really is going to be tasked with trying to stem this tide. There are these javelins here in position who have got a pretty good firing position, to be fair, onto units like Warns of Tir Gorthad. Dunedain captains are another good target. Just the basic pikes even might be a good target as well. The Blackback Mountain Berserkers are also here, but they're not actually on the front line, they're behind it, and in this situation I feel like they need to be in melee, because they would be tearing through this militia with reckless abandon. There are 2 units of Tharbad Warhammers down here, but they're really in the pits here with the trolls and the wargs. But the problem is the Misty Mountains, while they may be winning down here against Steel unit, they're still down on the low ground, taking a bunch of range fire from archers, from crossbows. The Rangers are also on their way over, which is a very worrying sight, to be honest. Black Uruks, the Mountains are already shaken. You can see here that they're just completely outmatched. There's a few routing units, there's still a few cave trolls. Steel unit's army is getting wiped away now. Here we can see the mass rout from Cardland. So their morale really coming into play. That may be enough to save the Misty Mountains going into the later portions of this fight, because they're going to be able to turn a lot of this stuff around that was initially fighting against Steel unit and get it into action against Agalar and Messier Corday's wings of the Cardland army. Speaking of which, there are mercenary crossbowmen heading around the back. Blackback Mountain Berserkers are here. The Royal Court of House Durandal are getting a nice charge here into the Black Uruks of the Mountains, trying to rescue these pockets of resistance here. And to be fair, these Tharbad Warhammers won't go down without a fight, so they're really making it difficult for the Misty Mountains to reorganise themselves as the bolts continue to rain down from the high ground. The Dunedain Rangers are getting into position now, and if they start shooting up this line, that's going to be the final nail in the coffin, I feel like, for the Misty Mountains armies. The Goblins are doing their best to hold on, and to be fair, where they're fighting militia, they're doing a good job, but it's over here where Messier Corday's full army is now making its way around the flank. 1 unit of Black Uruks of the Mountains was all Tundra's Fox could spare, and that is nowhere near enough. The wargs could be able to get a few decent charges in the confusion here. There go the Goblin infantry. But it's going to be quite difficult even then, because a lot of Cardland's army being made up of this militia means a lot of it is made up of spears and pikes, giving them a rather spiky feel when it comes to trying to charge them down with cavalry. Meanwhile, here come the trolls. They're going to try and get into the front line now as well. Now the Black Uruks of the Mountains, I think, no, they're still not in melee. They need to commit themselves now, because I mean it's only a matter of time before they're going to get, they're getting shot with Dunedain Rangers. They've loitered for too long, I think. And again, it's all well and good to say this at half speed, but you can sort of tell, like, it's fine margins, but I think the Misty Mountains have just stayed static in places for too long. And to be fair, they were always facing a bit of a struggle here, but I can't really see them recovering from this. Pretzels needs to get these units over to support his ally now. I know that he's microing his cavalry, but he's in real danger here of just sort of leaving these units out in the cold for too long, really. The Tharbad Warhammer's getting routed there, actually, and the Dunedain captain's shaken after a charge from the Warg Riders. It's exactly the sort of news they need to hear. But Aguilar's Tharbad Warhammers are still very much alive and still getting into the back lines, shooting these Snaga. Still, it's a case of the ranged units of Cardland doing the damage. The crossbows, the Rangers are also in position, and the Javelins, the Snaga, just not able to do what they need to do. And that, I think, is going to be the difference between the two, because Cardland definitely skimped on their melee capabilities. They had more cavalry, they had more ranged units of all types, other than Javelins. But this obviously left them with much less money to play with, in an RP sense, than their infantry line had, whereas the Misty Mountains here had a lot of pretty high damage infantry, including a lot of trolls to do a lot of damage quickly, but I feel as though Cardland have been able to dictate terms of the battle more so than the Misty Mountains have. The Misty Mountains had the right idea, trying to rush down Steel unit quickly, but I don't feel as though they necessarily executed it as well as they needed to. It needed to be perfect, really. You can see here the Snow Trolls getting into the Minhiriath Sharpshooters, but this is a unit which has been up on this hillside for a long time now, getting a lot of kills. So their work is almost certainly already done. The Dunedain Rangers shooting away into the Blackback Mountain Berserkers, I think. They certainly got a few volleys into them. And this Cardland phalanx with the pikes is able to hold on for the time being. Both sides are shaken though, so their limited morale coming into effect there. Pretzels is now getting his Mountaineer at coast over here, but again, I can't help but feel as though it's just a little bit too little too late for the Misty Mountains at this point. You can see here now another unit, yet another unit of Tharbad Warhammers able to crash through the ever weakening lines of the Misty Mountains. Tundra's Fox having to deal with a rout over on this side. Even with the drummers here, the odds are just against the Misty Mountains at this point, so it's not too surprising to see them start to break. The Heavy Goblin Spears are trying to hold on where they can. You can see over here, maybe the Blackback Berserkers can cause a bit of a rout on this side, because it's not completely over yet. If Cardland's line breaks here, the Misty Mountains will be able to charge up onto this hill, and then it will still be a competitive fight indeed. But Pretzels needs to start getting his units over here more quickly, and he cannot afford to get caught up in just chasing these skirmishers down like he already has. He needs, there's no way that they're just going to get kited by Cardland if they do that. They need to deal with the infantry. They need to smash that to pieces. If they have wargs, that's what they need to use that for. And you can see here that, yeah, yet again, they're getting caught up on chasing off units which are just not important. And that, I think, is going to be the difference between victory and defeat. The Bulks champions are going to be able to get into position here to shoot them in Helios Sharpshooters. And the real tragedy is Pretzels was sending off units of Blackback Berserkers to chase down those crossbows, which they could have been devastating if they recharged this line. To be fair, they have managed to get some Mountain Orc Berserkers and some Trolls over here, and they're dealing with the Rangers with consummate ease. The Greenway Garrison Archers are going to charge in, but of course they're terrible in melee, so they're not really going to be able to stop this from happening. The problem is, however, while the Misty Mountains are trying their best to recover on this side by wrapping up the line, it's already happening to them over on the other side. Messier Corday's army really doing a good job here, led by the Tharbad Warhammers and the Dunedain captains in the vanguard, being backed up by all of the pikes as well. If he can reorganise his army to start charging in, it's going to be a very, very rough fight for them indeed. Tharbad Warhammer is actually taking a bit of friendly fire there from the Gwathlo trackers. In come the Dunedain commanders as well to get a rear charge onto the Heavy Goblin Spears. That could be enough to rout them as well. No, they just about hold their ground. They could get a bit of damage done themselves with their spears. More Tharbad Warhammers. They've really been a very difficult unit for the Misty Mountains to deal with their very high damage and their AP. Still, there's wargs and cavalry running around the field here, and yeah, just static Mountaineer at coast. They're still trying to chase down the crossbows, but the crossbows have already paid for themselves. It's already too late to stop them from doing their thing. And I feel like getting hung up on that might be the final nail in the coffin for the Misty Mountains. The Blackback Berserkers are still over here. Greenway Garrison Spearmen, who were in reserve, are coming over here now. Messier Corday sending some of his army actually back around the back of his allies' line, so he's not sending his full army around here, but then he doesn't really need to send his full army around here. Snaga Skirmishers routing, a lot of Heavy Goblin Spears are routing at this point. Let's go back up to 1 speed. Tharbad Warhammers. Defeat seems certain for both sides. Here comes the Blackback Mountain Berserkers now. Greenway Garrison Spearmen, not exactly the quality of unit that are needed to stop this from happening. But this portion of the Misty Mountains line is still strong. The problem is, this portion is not. They're starting to rout en masse. And Messier Corday's army is still far too healthy, really. As if that wasn't enough, there's still the crossbows in the backfield. The Mountaineer at Coast are finally getting themselves into a position where they can be useful. In comes more reinforcements from Mercenary to really shore up this line as he also wraps up the line. So very good two-pronged assault there. There's a lot of routing units here. Heavy Goblin Spears, units of 100 running for the hills. That's always a bad sign for your side. It has been a competitive fight though. The Misty Mountains have certainly put up a good fight throughout, considering the odds were against them. But with all of this routing, I feel as though this is surely the end, especially considering that these crossbows are able to get into the back and shoot into the back of really the one area of the Misty Mountains army which is still putting up a good fight. Here are the Mountaineer at Coast on the front line, still cutting and carving their way through Cardinal and militia troops. Yeah, and it's the crossbows. Like the sheer amount of crossbows here was quite frankly disgusting. And again, I keep saying this, but I do not approve of crossbows in this patch. I just do not. The amount of stopping power they can bring to a battle is just, it's ridiculous in my opinion. I feel as though they need more clearly defined weaknesses, because at the moment, units like this, Minhiriad sharpshooters, you cannot deal with them at range with archers. They're too well armoured and they've got too big a shield value. They can get into position and they can fire, and you know, with the amount of power in their volleys, they can win skirmish fights for you. The same thing can be said of the Ironfoot crossbows from Erebor, and to a more limited extent, the Urukai crossbows from Isengard. But yeah, this is Cardlan's fight at this point. I don't really know how to fix them though, because you know that is what crossbows are meant to do. I just feel as though they need more clearly defined weaknesses. Maybe less ammunition. I know that they had their ammunition limited once before. Once upon a time, crossbows had an absolutely ridiculous amount of ammunition, but I feel as though that needs to be lowered even further with the amount of stopping power they offer. Because just from my experience, watching and playing in .97 games, crossbows are too easy to use and they're capable of doing too much damage. But that's just my 2 cents worth, I suppose. I'm sure that people may disagree with that, and that such a thing would make crossbow-heavy factions like Erebor and Cardlan much less appealing to play. But I don't feel as though it's too much of a surprise to see that Cardlan and Erebor tend to do very well in .97, at least in the battles that I've played in and seen. And that's a fair amount, I'd like to think. But let me know what you think. Let me know what your opinion is on crossbows in the comments, because I am curious to see if it's just me that feels the way I do, because I haven't seen a great deal of complaints about the crossbows, but when you see them in this sort of number, in this sort of situation, I don't know, something just doesn't feel right to me. Cardlan victorious though, and I feel as though this maybe is a good opportunity to talk about the crossbows, because I feel as though that's the main thing we can take from this battle. The crossbows, admittedly, they were in an ideal position. Cardlan also deserve some credit, I suppose, for sort of forcing the engagement they wanted, but by the same token, I really don't feel as though the Misty Mountains had too much of a choice in this situation. Yeah. Crossbows. Yay or nay? Do let me know what you think. The Tharbad Warhammers also did very well, and to be fair, like, I'm very much on board with how the Tharbad Warhammers performed in this battle. They did exactly what you'd imagine them to do. Steel Unit's army is gone. Messier Corday's army is still in pretty good health, to be honest with you, because they arrived on the scene last and wrapped up the line. Aguilar's army is damaged, to be fair, but still very much standing. Mercenary crossbows, what is still alive for the Misty Mountains? Heavy Goblin Spears are routing. Players admitting defeat at this point. They're still running away. Ah, it's this unit of Heavy Goblin Spears. As they trundle their way back to the lines. No Heavy Goblin Crossbowmen from the Misty Mountains either to sort of return the favour, but I suppose that's what you get from an RP battle. You sort of make your armies in advance, and I think clearly these armies were designed with a little bit more aggression in mind, but unfortunately they were forced into a situation where they kind of were on the back foot. Being aggressive when you're sort of on the back foot to such an extent is sort of like a charge of the Light Brigade like situation, really, especially considering they were massacred mainly by ranged units, I would imagine. We'll see what did the damage for Cardlan, but I would be very surprised if we didn't see a lot of kills on those crossbows. Dunedain captains here. This final unit of Heavy Goblin Spears routing off there. So a fairly comprehensive victory there for Cardlin in this RP battle. But again, I feel as though this is worth showing because I do want to spark a bit of discussion about the crossbows. I've mentioned it several times in my videos at this point. They don't sit right with me at the moment, honestly. Like, all you need to do is get them up onto a bit of high ground and they tend to just clean house, and there's very little sometimes you can do to actually stop them. Like I said, like units like the Midheliath sharpshooters, you know, the Minotaur Robin gatekeepers with the armour upgrade, and the higher tier arrowball crossbows, like, they do not die to arrow fire quickly. Like, they are able to stand up to that sort of thing to a good extent. It takes a very good unit of archers to take them out quickly, and you know, not every faction has got access to the sort of archers which are going to be able to do that. Obviously the elves do, you know, some of the kingdoms of men, but I mean, what if you are the Misty Mountains? Like, you know, you could respond with your own crossbows perhaps, but if they've got superior position and they're the better unit, what are you going to do? You know, you could try and smash through the lines with cave trolls and get at them. There are options here, but I just feel as though crossbows a little bit overtuned as it stands, and I don't feel as though they're any different to 0.96.1, to be honest with you, but I feel as though the other changes sort of that have moved around them have somehow left the crossbows in a better position than they were previously. And like I said, like, cause and effect, I feel as though it's not really too much of a surprise that I'm seeing quite a lot of Cardlin in 0.97, because crossbows are the main attraction with them. And for all people complain about the morale issues with Cardlin, it's very easy to keep your morale buffers near to your army and sort of completely mitigate that weakness of Cardlin, whilst also still retaining access to their incredibly powerful skirmish line. But again, that's something that I would throw over to you in the comments. What do you think? But we'll have a look at what did the damage for Cardlin. In here, the Ash Sharpshooters getting 100, Mercenary Crossbowmen getting 123, so yeah, we can see here, certainly the crossbows and the Tharbad Warhammers proving to be the most devastating units for Messier Corday's army, but of course he arrived on the scene later than the others. Over here, Tharbad Warhammer's getting the most kills, Royal Court of House Sarondor doing the damage, Dunedain Rangers getting a ton of kills as well, which more comes down, I think, to the fact that the Dunedain Rangers were able to take advantage of the Misty Mountains dawdling a little bit to get into melee with them, which again is on the Goblin players more so than Cardlin. And then Steel Unit, he got rushed down, so it's a little bit unfair to have a look at his kills. But his crossbows were the main attraction again, and his high tier infantry. Obviously his militia didn't do very well because they got crushed underfoot pretty quickly. His ballista honestly was still useful just for sort of coaxing the Misty Mountains into rushing forward as quickly as they did, but ultimately it didn't get a lot of kills, as you would imagine. But yeah, a comprehensive RP victory there for Cardlin, and what do you think? I'm interested. I really am interested to hear what people think about the crossbows, whether you play the game regularly or not. From what you have seen, what do you think? And don't just take my opinion for it. I'm interested to hear conflicting opinions on this as well. I'm sure J Monster would have something to say about this as well, because he understands the ideas behind the development a little bit more than I do. But yeah, what do people think of that? Again, I could also extend that to javelins, to be fair. I feel as though, in particular, the 10 damage javelins are very, very lethal, but that's kind of necessary. I mean, there is the school of thought which suggests that maybe if you sort of limit the use of crossbows and those higher end javelins, that units like knights would suddenly become all-conquering once again. And that is understandable, but I kind of feel as though wasn't that what the buffs to spears and anti-cavalry units on foot were meant to sort of help deal with? I don't know. Again, it's not something that I'm overly sort of against. Like, it's nowhere near to the same extent as like in the long ago, the Eldoranway archers, when they were armor piercing, you could have 3 and you know they would just mow down entire armies on the approach. It's nowhere near as bad as that, but it is something worth saying. I mean, obviously, you know, it's obviously a constantly shifting thing, the balance of Reforged as it gets developed, and you know, it's just something that I've noted. So yeah, I hope you enjoyed this. You know, obviously it's a very different fight to what we've seen previously. It's a very very quick, open battle and a fairly clear victory one way or the other in comparison to the very close and long sieges we've had previously. But it's still worth mentioning, of course, as I said, you know, still worth showing for the reasons that I've already said. Next, I think we will be making a return to the siege battles, and there is a map that I got sent called Dane's Halls, which I'm quite interested to see because I think that is an all-new map. And obviously that is a Dwarven-inspired siege, so you know, again, better settle in for that one because I imagine it's going to be a very long affair as well. But yeah, I hope you enjoyed this, and I hope you'll join me for whatever is next.